Rain fell endlessly that evening, blurring the streets of Maple Creek into a silver haze. The sky had turned a deep shade of gray, the kind that made the whole world look quieter than it really was. Inside her little white cottage, Emma Carson sat near the window with a cup of tea, watching the rain trace patterns on the glass. She had always loved the sound of it teet, kept her company when silence became too heavy. 2 years had passed since her divorce, and in that time Emma had learned to live with stillness. Her days were predictable morning walks, work from home, grocery runs, and quiet dinners for one. She didn't hate her life. She just stopped expecting surprises. Love, she told herself, was something that belonged to her past. She was 38 now. Careful, not the same woman who used to chase dreams. That night she had just opened a book when she heard Eden knock at the door. Soft, uncertain, but real. For a moment she thought it might be the wind, but it came again, a little firmer this time. Her heart gave a small, startled beat. No one ever came unannounced. She stood, hesitant, wondering who would come to see her at this hour. When she opened the door, a rush of cold air swept in, carrying the scent of rain. A man stood there, soaked to the bone, holding a crumpled bouquet of white lilies. His dark hair was dripping, his eyes tired but warm. "Emma," he said, almost in disbelief. Her breath caught. "Daniel." He nodded, his expression full of something she couldn't name. Relief, maybe, or pain. Daniel Reed had been her best friend in college 15 years ago. They had shared late-night study sessions, secret laughter, and unspoken feelings that never found the right moment. Then life had taken them in different directions. Emma into a marriage that ended too soon. Daniel into a career far away. She hadn't seen him since graduation. "What are you doing here?" she asked, half smiling, half shocked. "I didn't know where else to go," he said quietly. His voice trembled slightly, though not from the cold. Without thinking twice, Emma stepped aside. "Come in." The house was small but warm. The fire flickered in the corner, painting soft light across the wooden floors. Daniel set down his coat, and Emma handed him a towel. He laughed nervously, thanking her. And that small sound brought a wave of memories rushing back, days when they had laughed so easily. When everything had felt possible, they sat by the fire. Two people who used to know each other well, but now had years between them. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy with the weight of time. Daniel spoke first. "I moved back to town last week. My wife and I. Well, things didn't work out." Emma didn't ask for details. She knew that kind of pain too well. "I'm sorry," she said gently. He gave a sad smile. "I guess we both know how that feels." For a while, they talked about simple things, the old college days. People they had lost touch with. How life seemed to run faster the older they got. The sound of the rain softened as the fire grew warmer. Emma studied him when he wasn't looking. He looked older, yeslings at the corners of his eyes. A touch of gray in his hair, but there was still the same kindness in his face. She remembered how, years ago, he used to carry her books after class, and how his eyes had lingered a little too long when she laughed. She used to think he might say something one day, but he never did now, sitting across from him again. She felt something stir inside her, a faint ache she thought had long faded. He caught her looking and smiled. "You haven't changed much, you know." Emma laughed softly. "I think we both know that's not true." He shook his head. "No, really. You still have that same look in your eyes, like you're listening to everything but saying half of what you feel." His words hit deeper than she expected. She looked away, pretending to fix her hair. The truth was, she didn't know how to open up anymore. After the divorce, she had built walls around her heartstrung ones. But something about Daniel's presence felt disarming, almost too familiar. The rain outside began to fade into a soft drizzle. The clock on the mantel ticked quietly. Daniel leaned back, his expression softer now. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Emma hesitated. "You mean, if we had stayed in touch?" He nodded. "Maybe. I always wondered if we missed something back then." The words hung between them, fragile and real. Emma wanted to answer, to tell him she had wondered the same thing countless times. especially on lonely nights when she thought about what love used to feel like. But instead, she only said, "Maybe we did." He looked at her for a long moment, and in that quiet, something unspoken passed between them. Not quite love, not yet, but something close like to hearts, remembering they once knew the same rhythm. When Daniel finally stood to leave, it was already past midnight. Emma walked him to the door. The rain had stopped, but the air was still damp and cool. "Thank you," he said softly, "for letting me in." She smiled faintly. "You looked like you needed it." He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, but then just nodded and stepped outside. She watched him walk down the path, his figure fading into the foggy night as she closed the door. Emma leaned against it for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Something about the evening had changed her. The loneliness she had accepted for so long felt different now, not gone, but no longer comfortable. She looked around at the small space that had held her solitude for years, and realized how empty it suddenly felt again. But now it wasn't the kind of emptiness she wanted to protect. It was the kind she wanted to fill with laughter, warmth, maybe even love. As she turned off the lights and walked toward her bedroom, her eyes fell on the empty mug beside his chair and the faint scent of lilies still lingering in the air. She smiled without meaning to, lying in bed later. She couldn't stop thinking about his voice, his eyes, the way he had looked at her like time hadn't erased a thing. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring or if he'd ever come back. But one thought kept echoing in her mind as she drifted off to sleep. The first knock wasn't the last. She didn't know how, but she could feel something had begun again that night. Something gentle, uncertain, and full of possibility. And for the first time in years, Emma didn't feel afraid of what might come next. The days after Daniel's visit passed quietly, but the quiet no longer felt the same. Emma tried to convince herself that it had just been a friendly reunion, a moment of nostalgia between two people who had once shared something special. But the truth was, since that night, her heart had been restless. Every time the rain returned, she found herself glancing at the door, half expecting another knock, and eventually, it came, though not from the person she thought. It was early December, the air sharp with cold. Snow had started falling, dusting the street in soft white layers. Emma was in the kitchen stirring a pot of soup when the knock echoed through the house. She wiped her hands and hurried to the door, her heart racing. She thought maybe Daniel had come again. But when she opened it, her breath caught in surprise. Standing there was her younger sister, Megan. Emma hadn't seen her in nearly 4 years. Their last conversation had ended in anger after a long argument over their parents' inheritance and the way Emma had handled their family home. It was an argument that had broken more than just trust. It had broken the bond they once thought unshakable. "Megan," Emma said softly, unsure if she was dreaming. Megan looked tired, her eyes heavy, her suitcase at her feet. "Hi, Em," she said quietly. Can I stay for a few days?" Emma hesitated, the old hurt rising for a moment, but she pushed it down. The years had been long enough, and seeing her sister like that melted every bit of pride left in her. "Of course," she said, stepping aside. "Come in before you freeze." The warmth of the cottage embraced them both. Megan smiled faintly as she looked around. "It still smells like cinnamon and coffee in here. You never change." Emma laughed softly, realizing how much she had missed that voice. Some things don't need to. They talked late into the night, their words cautious at first, then easier as the hours passed. Megan shared that she had left her job and her fiancé in Chicago, needing space to think. Emma didn't ask too many questions. She just listened, the way older sisters do when they know their sibling is quietly breaking inside by the end of the week. The house no longer felt lonely. There were 2 cups of coffee in the morning, shared meals, laughter that returned like music after years of silence. Emma began to feel lighter, like her home had found its heartbeat again. Then one morning, another familiar sound came, the creak of the front gate. Emma looked out the window and froze. It was Daniel. He walked up the snowy path with that same half smile, holding a small box of pastries. "I brought breakfast," he said when she opened the door. Emma's surprise turned into warmth. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he replied, stepping inside. That morning, Daniel met Megan for the first time met her again. They had known each other back in college, though only briefly. He looked at her, eyes widening in recognition. "You're Megan Carson, right? Emma's sister." Megan laughed. "And you're Daniel Reed? You used to steal her notes before exams." Emma chuckled awkwardly, suddenly aware of the soft tension in the room. It was strange seeing the two of them together. They got along easily, as if they'd always known how to talk to each other. Over the next few days, Daniel stopped by often. Sometimes to bring coffee, sometimes to help Emma fix something around the house, and sometimes just to sit and talk. Megan joined them more and more. And soon the cottage was full of voices, stories, and warmth Emma hadn't felt in years. But along with the laughter came something else. Something Emma couldn't quite explain. One evening, Daniel and Megan stood on the porch watching the snow fall. Emma was inside setting the table for dinner. Through the window, she saw them talking quietly, smiling. They looked comfortable together, their faces soft in the dim glow of the porch light. Emma froze for a moment, the fork in her hand slipping slightly. She didn't know why her chest tightened like that. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly, more like fear. Fear of losing something before it even began. When Daniel came in, his smile was gentle as always. But Emma couldn't stop noticing how Megan's laughter followed him into the room. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to the faint hum of the heater and the snow tapping at the window. Her thoughts ran in circles. Maybe she was being foolish. Maybe she was just reading too much into things. But still, something inside her whispered that she was standing at the edge of something uncertain. Over the next week, the closeness between Daniel and Megan grew more visible. They shared jokes, remembered old college stories, and sometimes went out to get groceries together. Emma told herself it didn't matter, but her heart argued otherwise. One afternoon, Daniel came by with a small Christmas wreath. "Thought you might like this," he said. "It's beautiful," Emma replied, taking it gently. "Thank you," he smiled. "You always like decorating early." Megan, standing nearby, teased. "Of course she does. She used to start planning Christmas in September." Daniel laughed, and for a moment the room filled with warmth again. But Emma felt her smile waver. She realized she wasn't just afraid of being alone anymore. She was afraid of being forgotten, even in her own story. Still, she didn't say anything. She kept her feelings tucked away, hidden beneath polite smiles and small talk. On Christmas Eve, the three of them sat by the fire, exchanging gifts. It was peaceful, almost perfect. Daniel gave Emma a book of poems she had loved in college, and Megan gifted her a soft knitted scarf. For a few moments, it felt like family again. But that night, as the clock ticked toward midnight, Emma woke to the faint sound of laughter outside. She went to the window and saw Daniel and Megan standing in the snow, talking softly, their breath visible in the cold air. Megan reached out and brushed snow from his shoulder, and he smiled. It was a small, simple gesture, but to Emma, it meant everything. She turned away quickly, her eyes stinging. It wasn't anger that filled her with sorrow, a quiet kind that comes when you realize something you hoped for might not be yours to keep. The next morning, the cottage felt different. Emma busied herself with chores, trying to avoid the silence between her and Megan. But deep down, she knew what was happening. Daniel was still kind, still gentle, but his glances had shifted. They lingered a little longer on Megan now, that evening. As the sun disappeared behind the snowy hills, Emma stood by the window again, watching the lights of Maple Creek flicker in the distance. She whispered softly to herself, the first knock wasn't the last. But this time, the words carried a different meaning. The first knock had opened her heart again. The second one was testing how strong it truly was. And as she stood there, the sound of laughter echoing faintly from the porch, Emma realized that the story of her heart was far from over. It was only changing quietly, painfully, but beautifully. January came with a deep quiet that wrapped Maple Creek in gray stillness. Snow covered everything like a soft blanket, and the streets were empty except for the occasional passing car. Inside her cottage, Emma tried to keep her mind busy reading, cooking, working, but the silence between her and Megan had grown thick. Daniel still visited, but something about his presence had changed. His kindness was the same, his smile familiar. But the warmth that once belonged to Emma now seemed to drift toward her sister. She didn't blame either of them. Life had a way of giving and taking without asking permission. Still, it hurt in a way she couldn't quite explain. Some nights, when the fire flickered low, Emma caught herself wondering if the universe was teaching her something about letting go, or if it was simply reminding her how fragile hope could be. Then, one cold evening in late January, there came another knock. Emma was alone that night. Megan had gone to meet a friend in town, and Daniel hadn't visited in several days. The house was still, the clock ticking softly. When the sound came again, slow, steady, and familiar in a way that made her chest tighten, she walked to the door uncertain, and when she opened it, she froze, standing there. Holding an umbrella was her ex-husband, Richard. He looked different from the man she remembered. His hair had thinned a little, his face more lined, but his eyes, those calm blue eyes, were still the same. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the wind brushing through the trees. "Hi, Emma," he said finally, his voice quiet. "I was passing through town. Thought I'd stop by." She hesitated, unsure if she was ready to face him again. But then she noticed the weariness in his face, the smallness of his smile, and all the anger she once carried seemed to dissolve. "Come in," she said softly. The warmth of the cottage surrounded them. Richard looked around, smiling faintly. "You still have the same curtains," he said. "I remember you picking those out." Emma smiled a little. "I guess I never changed them." He sat down by the fire while she poured tea. The silence between them wasn't sharp like it used to be, was gentle, even kind. After a while, he said, "I heard you're still living here alone." "Mostly," she replied. "My sister's been staying with me for a while." He nodded, stirring his tea. "I'm glad you have company. I never liked the thought of you being lonely." His words caught her off guard. She had spent years thinking he never cared about her loneliness, that he had moved on without looking back. But now, hearing that quiet concern in his voice, something inside her softened. "I guess we both made mistakes," Emma said. Richard sighed. "I made more than my share. I was too focused on my work, on being right all the time. I didn't realize I was losing you until it was already done." She looked at him, searching for bitterness, but finding none. "You don't have to apologize." "Yes, I do," he said gently, "because I hurt someone who only ever tried to love me." The words lingered in the air like a fragile confession. Emma didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded. They talked for a while about small things at first, then deeper ones. He told her about his move to Boston, about how he'd tried dating again but never found what he was looking for. "Maybe because I already found it once," he said quietly, eyes on the fire. Emma's heart tightened. Part of her wanted to believe him, but another part knew that too much time had passed. The woman she was then, the one who loved him endlessly and waited for him to come home from work, was gone. Just then, the front door opened. Daniel stepped in, snow dusting his coat. His expression froze when he saw Richard sitting there. "Oh," he said, caught off guard. "I didn't realize you had company." Emma stood awkwardly. "Daniel, this is Richard, my ex-husband. Richard, this is Daniel, an old friend." The two men exchanged polite greetings, but the air between them was uneasy. Daniel sat down, pretending not to notice how Richard's eyes lingered on Emma when she spoke, or how Emma's tone softened when she addressed her ex. A few minutes later, Megan arrived, her cheeks pink from the cold. She smiled, unaware of the tension, and soon the living room was full of polite chatter. But under the small talk ran an invisible current of emotion, old love, new confusion, quiet longing, an unspoken truce weaving together like threads of the same tangled story. Emma sat there, watching them all, realizing how strange life could be. Three people, each from a different chapter of her heart, now sharing the same room after dinner. Richard stood to leave. "I should go," he said, putting on his coat. "It was good to see you, Emma. Really good." She walked him to the door. "Take care of yourself," she said softly. He nodded, looking at her one last time. "You look happier here than you ever did with me. I think that's what I came to see." When the door closed, Emma stood still for a long time, staring at the snow falling outside. Daniel came over quietly. "Are you okay?" She nodded. "I think so." He smiled faintly. "He still cares about you." She turned toward him. "And you?" For a moment, he didn't answer. His eyes were warm, but heavy with meaning. "You already know the answer to that," he said softly. Then he walked away, leaving her in the glow of the fire. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Emma sat by the window, again the same place where she had sat so many nights before. The world outside was quiet, the snow glowing under the streetlights. She felt a strange calm settling over her, even though her heart was tangled in too many directions. 3 knocks. 3 people. Daniel, who represented what could have been. Megan, who reminded her of forgiveness. And Richard, who showed her what she had survived. She realized then that life wasn't trying to confuse her, was trying to complete her. Each person had come back for a reason, bringing with them a mirror of who she once was and who she was becoming. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether Daniel would stay, whether Megan would move on, or whether Richard would ever visit again, but for the first time in years. She wasn't afraid to find out, as the fire dimmed and the night deepened. She whispered to herself the 3rd knock wasn't the end. It was another beginning. She smiled faintly, resting her hand on the window pane. Outside, the wind carried a soft hum through the quiet streets of Maple Creek. And for the first time, Emma didn't feel like she was waiting for someone to arrive. She felt like she had finally arrived in her own life. Winter slowly melted away from Maple Creek, leaving puddles of soft sunlight and the faint smell of wet earth. The days began to stretch longer, and the snow that once wrapped the town in silence was now retreating. Emma felt it too. Something inside her was changing, thawing in the same quiet way the world outside was. Life in the little white cottage had returned to its slow rhythm. Daniel still visited now and then. Megan was preparing to leave for a new job in Seattle. And Richard had gone back to Boston after that unexpected evening. The cottage that once felt crowded with emotion was calm again. Yet not the same kind of calm it had been before. This time the silence felt earned. One morning, Emma stood in the kitchen pouring coffee when Megan walked in, her suitcase half-packed. "Are you sure you'll be okay alone again?" Megan asked, concern flickering in her eyes. Emma smiled, stirring her cup. "I'll be fine. I think I needed all of this to realize that." Megan hugged her tightly. "I'm sorry for everything, Em, for leaving the way I did years ago, for making things hard between us." Emma held her close. "You came back. That's what matters." After Megan left, the house felt emptier again, but not lonely. Emma spent her days repainting the porch, cleaning the garden, and rediscovering the small joys she used to overlook. She started writing again, something she hadn't done since her 20 short reflections about love, forgiveness, and the beauty of endings that quietly lead to new beginnings. Then, one Sunday morning in early March, there was a knock. This time. It was gentle, not hurried or heavy, just a soft, patient sound. Emma opened the door and found Daniel standing there, holding a single tulip. His eyes carried a warmth she hadn't seen in weeks. "I didn't know if I should come," he said softly. "You seemed like you needed time." "I did," Emma admitted, "but I'm glad you're here." They sat outside on the porch steps, the spring air cool and fresh. Birds were returning, and the sound of the creek nearby filled the quiet spaces between their words. Daniel sighed. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what we could have been and what we are now." Emma looked at him, waiting. He smiled faintly. "When I first came here that night, I thought maybe life was giving me a second chance at something I lost years ago. But now I think it was giving me something else, a reason to stop running from the past." She nodded slowly. I think that's what it gave me too. They talked for hours about how strange life could be, how it pulled people apart only to bring them back. When they'd learned how to hold things gently this time, Daniel didn't make promises, and Emma didn't ask for any. They both knew that love, if it was going to stay, didn't need to be rushed. When he left that afternoon, he gave her the tulip. "For your window," he said with a smile. "Something to remind you that winter doesn't last forever." After he left, Emma placed the flower in a glass jar by the kitchen window, sunlight catching its petals. She stood there for a long time, watching how the light fell on it, feeling a quiet sense of peace. Days passed, and spring began to bloom. The small town came back to life, markets reopened, children played outside, and laughter returned to the air. Emma walked more often now, greeting neighbors she hadn't spoken to in years. People noticed the difference in her lighter steps, her softer eyes. One afternoon, she received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was familiar Richard's. He wrote that he had taken a new job, that he was doing well, and that he was grateful for seeing her again. At the end of the note, he wrote, "You were right. We were never meant to last forever, but maybe we were meant to make each other better before we let go." Emma smiled as she read it. She realized then that some love stories don't end when people walk away. They end when both hearts finally find peace. As weeks went by, the cottage filled with new sounds, birds singing at dawn, the kettle whistling, the soft scratch of her pen on paper. Emma started writing short letters to herself, as if to the woman she had once been, the lonely one, who used to stare at the rain and wonder if she'd ever feel alive again. In one of those letters, she wrote, "The knocks weren't interruptions. They were reminders. Each one brought back a part of me I'd forgotten how to love." She smiled as she folded the paper, placing it in a small wooden box near her window. Then, one morning in late April, there came one more knock. It was early, the sky painted in soft gold. Emma opened the door to find the mailman holding a small envelope. "Morning, Ms. Carson," he said kindly. "You've got a letter." "Thank you," she said, taking it with a smile. Inside was a postcard from Megan. The picture showed the Seattle skyline at sunset. On the back, her sister had written, "You were right. Sometimes letting people in is the only way to find yourself again. Thank you for opening your door and your heart to all of us." Emma felt tears rise, but they were soft, happy tears. She looked around her little home, the same one that had once been so quiet, now filled with the memories of every knock that had changed her life. The first knock had brought back friendship and hope. The second had brought forgiveness. The third had brought closure. And this last one, a simple letter, brought peace. That evening, Emma sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The light turned golden, touching everything gently, the trees, the path, the old white fence. She thought about Daniel, about Megan, about Richard, and how each of them had walked through her door at exactly the right time. She realized she didn't need to know what the future held. She didn't need to chase love or fear loneliness anymore. Her heart was open, steady, and whole. The world had knocked again and again, and she had finally learned how to let it in without losing herself. As the sky faded into soft pink, Emma whispered to herself, "The first knock wasn't the last, and I'm glad I opened the door every time." A warm breeze brushed against her face, carrying the scent of tulips from her garden. Somewhere down the street, wind chimes played a gentle tune. Emma smiled, closing her eyes for a moment, feeling the quiet rhythm of her heart. It wasn't the same kind of silence she once feared. It was the kind that comes when a story has been told, and the ending feels exactly right. And though the day would fade, she knew one thing for certain. If there ever came another knock, she wouldn't hesitate. She'd open the door again, ready to see what life wanted to bring next, because now she finally understood. Every knock had been life itself, asking her to come back to love, to hope, to herself.